Vanessa when so few ever understood her at all. She had been given that face to sketch for the rest of her life, to spend her days trying and failing to capture her hair. In this one moment of brilliant clarity, a clarity Joan knows she will lose her grasp on within seconds and have to fight like hell for years to come back to, Joan understands that God gave her something spectacular. A love and a life beyond the confines of her imagination. Small, slight, unimportant Joan, just one person of 5 billion on a small planet, orbiting a small star in a humble galaxy. One of billions of galaxies. Joan is so insignificant, and yet, look what God had given her. Look at all that God had given her. Look at no one will ever be able to take away. Vanessa has gone into the ether, and it will make Joan even more eager to take each breath. What a world. Joan hears a crackle in her headset. She lunges forward. She watches Jack turn his gaze to the screens. All at once, they begin to update. Stunned, this is Navigator. Do you read? The air rushes into Joan's lungs. Vanessa? Vanessa, are you there? And then Vanessa's voice comes through, loud and clear. Houston, this is Navigator. Lydia Danes is alive. I am about to land at Edwards. The entire room erupts into such a loud cheering that Joan jumps. Navigator, Joan says, we read you. Vanessa lets out a wild sigh, sharp and whistling. Hi, Vanessa said. Joan takes a breath. Hi. She closes her eyes and smiles. Maybe they had not asked for too much. Maybe they would get everything they wanted. And we'll conclude our reading at this point. You've been listening to a serialized reading of the book Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. The Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service presents serialized book readings weekday afternoons at 2 and weeknights at 10. You have been listening to Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Thank you for listening, and this is Lenny Mann concluding Atmosphere.
Coming up next on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have a reading of the Wall Street Journal. Following that, the following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Donald, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the January 16th issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Basketball Scandal Broadens with New Charges by Jared Diamond and Louise Ranofsky, Philadelphia. Federal prosecutors on Thursday charged a pair of gamblers with allegedly conspiring with dozens of basketball players to rig games ranging from U.S. colleges to the top professional league in China, in one of the most sprawling gambling cases in the history of U.S. sports. The case that emerged in 2024 appeared limited to a fringe National Basketball Association forward in Toronto, but the allegations expanded to pull in an NBA head coach and a star player with connections to fixed poker games and organized crime. Then it grew again. This, said U.S. Attorney David Metcalf for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, was a massive scheme that enveloped the world of college basketball. In total, The government alleges that at least 39 players on 17 Division I teams manipulated about 29 contests in 2024 and 2025 in places such as Moon Township, Pennsylvania, Hattiesburg, Mississippi. The schools alleged to be involved feature a Big East stalwart, DePaul, and two programs that reached the NCAA tournament last March, Robert Morris and Alabama State. 4 of the players charged appeared in games this week, including one who scored 21 points for Kennesaw State as recently as Wednesday night. Taken together, the charges in Thursday's indictment offered the latest reminder of how persuasive game rigging has become in the area of legal sports gambling in the U.S. No level of basketball is safe. At the center of the indictment are a pair of gamblers named Shane Hennigan and Marvis Freely. Prosecutors said that the pair received 5- and 6-figure bets on contests that were fixed. Lawyers for Hennigan and Freely declined to comment on Thursday. They are 2 of the same men who are facing charges in New York for allegedly conspiring with athletes to manipulate their performance in a half-dozen NBA games in 2023 and 2024. But before the scheme arrived at gyms on the campuses of Coppin State and Abilene Christian, it originated on the other side of the world in the coastal province of Jiangsu, China. Around September 2022, the government says Hennigan and Fairley found a former NBA guard named Antonio Blakeney, who would become a leading scorer in Chinese basketball. Not only was he willing to accept bribes to throw games, but he was also prepared to recruit his Jiangsu Dragon teammates to help. Prosecutors alleged. Lawyers for Blakely declined to comment Thursday. Within months, the scam had become so foolproof, the government said that in April 2023, Hennigan reassured a co-schemer by sending a text message. "Nothing's guaranteed in this world but death, taxes, and a Chinese basketball," he wrote. The same month, Fairley allegedly placed a package into Blakeney's storage unit in Florida that contained nearly $200,000 in cash, bribe payments, and proceeds from the fixed Chinese games. Then, Hennigan, Farley, and Blakeney brought their operation back stateside into the college game. Working with fixers with connections to NCAA basketball, they met, called, and messaged players on social media, allegedly offering bribes typically ranging from $10,000 to $30,000 to participate. In most cases, the group would target players on teams expected by odds makers to lose and get them to ensure the team would fail to cover the point spread, and the indictment said. Sometimes they would persuade the players to just throw the first half without affecting the final outcome of the game. In February 2024, for instance, the group allegedly recruited players from St. Louis University to underperform in a contest against Duquesne. Farley and others bet about $242,000 that St. Louis would fail to cover the first half spread of around 5. The St. Louis Billikens trailed by 14 at halftime. Protecting competition integrity is the utmost importance for the NCAA, President Charles Baker said. We are thankful for law enforcement agencies working to detect and combat integrity issues and match manipulation in college sports. American sports has teetered towards and dreaded a scenario like Thursday ever since the Supreme Court opened the door for states to legalize sports betting in 2018. Gambling is now a cultural fixture, with fans able to gamble from their phones and in some stadiums, while every professional league maintains sportsbook partnerships. In turn, gambling scandals have broken out across the sports landscape in recent years, including college and professional baseball, threatening the credibility of competition that underpins the entire enterprise. The Pennsylvania announcement marked the latest chapter in an investigation that has been steadily expanding for the last 18 months. First, former Toronto Raptors forward Jonte Porter admitted that he faked injuries or illness so that gamblers, including Hemmon, could win bets on his performance. In October of last year, NBA guard Terry Rozier was charged with prosecutors saying he faked an injury and withdrew early from a game to help bettors cash in on his underperformance. He has pleaded not guilty. Portland Trail Blazers head coach Chauncey Billups was also accused of giving gamblers inside information. He has denied wrongdoing. Metcalf, the U.S. attorney, said that what transpired in college basketball was even worse. He said that while there was a relationship between these charges in Pennsylvania and the ones in New York involving Hennett and Farley, fundamentally this is a different criminal scheme. The NBA games in question revolved around wagers on individual player statistics, widely known as proposition bets. The NCAA has long advocated for the elimination of these sorts of wagers in college sports and have successfully lobbied some states to stop offering them. Here, however, Hennon, Farley, and Blakeney weren't targeting player stats at all. Instead, they were allegedly responsible for the outright rigging of games and persuaded more than 36 players to go along with it. Deals power a record year for big banks. Executives expect more of the same in 2026, though they acknowledge risk. By Anna Maria Andrew-Titus. Wall Street is rolling into the new year firing on all cylinders after the nation's biggest banks had one of the strongest years on record in 2025. Big companies struck more giant deals and increased borrowing. Traders raced to maneuver around geopolitical upheaval and bet on the rise of artificial intelligence. Consumers and the wealthy continued to spend, invest, and borrow. Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley both posted record annual revenue in their investment banking and trading divisions Thursday, wrapping up a strong week of performances from the country's largest banks. Combined with J.P. Morgan, Chase Bank of America, Citigroup, and Wells Fargo, the six biggest banks brought in some $593 billion in revenue in 2025, up 6% and better than any prior year. Their combined profits of about $157 billion were up 8% and only slightly behind the 2021 pandemic year, which was inflated by accounting moves. While executives were quick to flag risk, especially in policy and global strife, they remained confident that 2026 would be even better, predicting more initial public offerings, mergers, and private equity deals, and the financing that fuels deals. Now, there is really no more time to waste. Morgan Stanley Chief Executive Ted Pick said of clients looking to strike deals. Powering the gains were trading floors across Wall Street, which saw surges in client volume from the April tariff announcements that sank markets and the recovery that put the S&P 500 and Dow Jones indexes at record highs. Goldman Sachs maintained the top spot in equities trading revenue, making $16.5 billion in fees, up 23% from the prior year, while Morgan Stanley and JP Morgan increased revenue by 28% and 33% respectively. At Goldman, lending reverberated across the firm, helping to increase revenue in investment banking, wealth management, and teams that are adjacent to the trading desk. The bank had record revenue from equity financing, which involves lending to hedge funds and other trading clients, and FICC financing, which involves a range of lending to clients such as capital call loans made to investment firms and warehouse financing to mortgage lenders. After a rocky start to the year, confidence returned to corporate boardrooms and executive suites to pursue mergers, with 2025 producing the second highest merger volume on record, according to data provided LSEG. The pickup in mergers and acquisitions is also fueling a rise in lending that helps make these deals happen. Industry-wide debt underwriting activity in 2025 surpassed the previous high in 2020, according to Dealogic, and the loans clients used to acquire companies also records, Dealogic said. Goldman Sachs Chief Executive David Solomon said his team had produced a slide that said that the base outcome for M&A this year would be close to the 2021 record, with the bullish view would set a record. In the IPO markets, after years of quiet, 2025 saw a thawing, and bankers are hoping 2026 could be the biggest year ever for IPOs, with rocket maker SpaceX, artificial intelligence company Anthropic, and others eyeing listings. Still, bankers caution that the year could face potential hiccups. There is concern about the future impact of increasing global conflicts, interest rate and inflation uncertainties, and a slowing U.S. job market. Geopolitical is an enormous amount of risk, J.P. Morgan Chief Executive Jamie Dimon said. I have to go through each part of it. It's just a big amount of risk that may or may not determine the state of the economy. We're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal and the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Trump's Healthcare Framework Takes Aim at Cost, by Natalie Andrews and Sabrina Siddiqui, Washington. President Trump is urging Congress to make health care a priority this year, endorsing a series of proposals that come as his party faces mounting political pressure over rising costs ahead of the midterm elections. The White House released a health care framework Thursday called the Great Health Care Plan, which seeks to lower prescription drug prices, increase price transparency, and redirect federal subsidies from insurers to consumers. Passing the proposal into law is expected to be a tall order for a gridlocked Washington that has struggled for months to agree on health care compromise aimed at easing higher premiums and other costs for millions of Americans. The plan brings together ideas that have been pitched by several lawmakers and asks Congress to codify executive actions designed to bring U.S. drug prices in line with the lowest level paid by other rich countries. The plan wouldn't replace the Affordable Care Act, which many Republicans campaign on repealing. White House officials said the measure would give more power to consumers if all the proposals were passed. The framework is light on details and doesn't endorse specific bills or give a timeline for when Trump wants it passed, but it does seek to codify many of the actions Trump has taken on addressing health care costs. The proposal doesn't endorse extending enhanced Obamacare subsidies, which expired in December. Rather than paying insurers through the subsidies, Trump's plan would instead deposit those funds directly into a health savings account, similar to a health savings account, and implement a cost-sharing reduction program. Instead of putting the needs of the big corporations and special interests first, our plan finally puts you first and puts more money in your pocket, Trump said in a video posted on the White House social media accounts. The plan calls for price transparency, urging any healthcare provider or insurer who accepts Medicare or Medicaid to promptly post their pricing and fees. Price transparency bills in Congress have support from Republicans and Democrats. Consumers know how to shop and how to make sure their bills are accurate to what they agreed on up front, said Cynthia Fisher, founder of PatientRightsAdvocate.org, a nonprofit organization seeking healthcare price transparency. Trump's plan seeks to end kickbacks from pharmacy benefit managers to the large brokerage middlemen to lower costs. Lawmakers from both parties have criticized pharmacy benefit managers, which usually play a key role in getting prescriptions filled and reimbursed, for what the administration says is anti-competitive tactics that keep drug prices artificially high. The Trump administration has negotiated with major drug makers in an attempt to lower U.S. drug costs with a policy known as most favored nation pricing. Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and EMD Serono, along with other companies, have announced deals with the administration. The drugs are expected to be sold through a website known as Trump RX later this year. Lawmakers have struggled to come up with a compromise to extend the subsidies, which were passed during the pandemic and helped more than 20 million people. House Democrats, joined by 17 Republicans, passed a 3-year extension of the subsidies earlier this month. But the legislation has been dead on arrival in the Senate, where a bipartisan group is locked in negotiations over the alternative that would extend the subsidies for 2 years. President threatens to invoke Insurrection Act in Minnesota, by Ken Thomas and Victoria Albert. President Trump threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act, a 19th century law that could allow him to deploy the military inside the U.S. in response to protests in Minnesota that have widened after an immigration and customs enforcement officer fatally shot a woman. If the corrupt politicians of Minnesota don't obey the law and stop the professional agitators and insurrectionists from attacking the patriots of ICE, who are only trying to do their job, I will institute the Insurrection Act, Trump wrote Thursday morning on Truth Social, adding that the move would quickly put an end to the travesty that is taking place in that once great state. The Insurrection Act authorizes the president to use the military for civilian law enforcement purposes in the U.S. in a narrow set of circumstances. The law is an exception to the Paz Comatas Act, which typically places strict limits on how federal forces can be used in U.S. soil. Any use of the Insurrection Act would likely face legal challenges. The threat escalates a week-long battle between Trump and Minnesota leaders. ICE agents were deployed en masse to Minnesota on the heels of a welfare fraud scandal that brought the state's Somali immigrants into national spotlight. The Department of Homeland Security has said it is the largest operation in the agent's history. As ICE agents killing of 37-year-old Renee Nicole Good in Minneapolis last week further inflamed tensions, sparking widespread protests. A federal immigration agent shot and killed a Venezuelan man in Minneapolis on Wednesday, authorities said. The officer shot the man in the leg after he attempted to flee a traffic stop Wednesday, according to the Department of Homeland Security. Minnesota Democrat Governor Tim Walz said 2,000 to 3,000 federal agents have been deployed in the state. In a brief speech on Wednesday evening, he encouraged residents to protest peacefully and record agents' actions. Walz on Thursday made a direct appeal to Trump on social media. "Let's turn the temperature down," he said. "Stop this campaign of retribution. This is not who we are." Walz received support from two fellow Democrat governors, Andy Beshear of Kentucky and Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan, who urged Republican governors to join us in defending states' rights by speaking out against these threats for a chaotic and un-American federal takeover. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem said Thursday that the Trump administration had no plans to pull out of Minnesota and that the ICE personnel were acting lawfully. Asked why some Minnesota residents are being asked to show proof of citizenship, Noem said, "In every situation, we are doing targeted enforcement. If we are to target and do an operation, there may be individuals surrounding that criminal that we may need to be asking who they are and why they are there and having them validate their identity. That's what we've always done." Noem said she discussed the Insurrection Act with Trump on Thursday morning. "He certainly has the constitutional authority to utilize that," she said. Trump has previously threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act over tensions in blue-leaning cities, but he hasn't used the law, instead drawing on other legal authorities to deploy the National Guard in cities such as Los Angeles and Chicago. Trump said in December that he would end the deployment of National Guard units in several cities after suffering a loss at the Supreme Court over the presence of troops in Chicago. Trump considered using the Insurrection Act in 2020 to quell a protest over the killing of George Floyd, but faced pushback from within his administration. The Wall Street Journal reported at the time he ultimately decided against it. The Insurrection Act has been invoked only a few dozen times in U.S. history, according to the Brennan Center for Justice, a public policy think tank. It was most recently used by then-President George H.W. Bush at the request of California Governor to aid with civil unrest over the acquittal of 4 police officers in a beating of Rodney King, the center said. Any attempt to invoke the act would almost certainly face legal challenges. The law as written is extremely broad, says Laura Dickinson, a professor at George Washington University Law School. Nevertheless, she said, it has been interpreted by both parties as an emergency option to be used when law and order has been completely broken down. U.S. forces seize sixth oil tanker near Venezuela by Shelby Holiday, Costas Paris, and Malign Kresny. U.S. forces seized a sixth oil tanker Thursday, the U.S. Southern Command confirmed. In a pre-dawn raid, Marines and sailors launched from the USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier in the Caribbean and apprehended the vessel Veronica, according to the military Southern Command. The Veronica is the latest tanker operating in defiance of President Trump's established quarantine of sanctioned vessels in the Caribbean, U.S. Southern Command said on social media. The move could raise tensions with Russia, which has been moving to protect Dark Fleet tankers in recent weeks. The Veronica has now changed its name to the Galileo, and its new registered owner is Burvestamian, a Russian firm, according to the shipping database Equinus. The tanker reflagged to sail under the Russian tricolor, as many shadow tankers have been doing. Their hope is to avoid interception by the U.S. military and skirt the blockade and Venezuelan oil movements. The tanker previously was owned by MG/Flat LLC, a company that has been sanctioned by the Treasury Department for transporting weapons from Iran for the Moscow businessman Dzhandan Imragalovich Pacivist, whom the Treasury identified as chairman of the board of LOT, is accused of helping to transport military goods globally, including one of the Russians' primary drone plants. The Trump administration's crackdown on what is called the Dark Fleet that transports sanctioned oil has continued as the U.S. seeks to work with Venezuela's interim government to control the nation's oil sales. The oil tanker crackdown has had a significant impact on Venezuela's oil exports. This month, crude loadings have fallen to about half of the normal levels, according to shipping analytics provider Kepler. The only ships that are loading crude at Venezuela's ports are tankers bound for the U.S. and those transporting oil to Venezuelan refineries, the company said. U.S. officials have said they are working with Caracas that the U.S. could receive Venezuelan crude that is backed up for onshore facilities and floating tankers that serve as oil storage and then sell it. Many of those barrels have been blocked from going to China and other markets because of the U.S. blockade. The Dark Fleet model with Venezuela for now has been broken because there are no cargoes, said Michelle Weiss-Blackman, a maritime intelligence analyst at Windmart. Whether or not the Dark Fleet will be able to resume shipping to China, given that the U.S. is working with the PDVSA, the Venezuelan state oil company, to control what's going in and out of the country, is quite possibly that the Dark Fleet tonnage will no longer call there. There are dozens of ships carrying Venezuelan oil in the Caribbean and other waters around the world that the U.S. could try to take control of if Trump wants to widen the crackdown, analysts say. Kepler estimates that as of January 13th, about 15.5 million barrels of crude oil and 17 tankers in Venezuela waters, not including ships heading to the U.S. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal and the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. German and UK economies show signs of recovery, by Ed Frankel and Don Nico Forbes. Europe's largest economy showed signs of recovery last year after nearly a decade in stagnation, but declining exports, intense competition from China, and ensuring Berlin's massive stimulus funds are effectively deployed remain challenges to sustain growth. Meanwhile, the UK economy grew more than expected in November, a boost for the government as it seeks to build momentum after years of economic drift. German gross domestic product, in the Eurozone's largest member, increased 0.2% in 2025. German statistics agency Census said on Thursday, a turnaround after the economy contracted a 0.9% and 0.5% in 2023 and 2024 respectively. Growth was also at 0.2% in the fourth quarter, according to the early estimates by Census. Exports of goods tumbled 0.7% in 2025, driven by lower vehicle and chemicals exports, Census said. By contrast, imports rose by 3.6% after 2 years of decline. Germany's export business faced strong headwinds owing to higher U.S. tariffs, the appreciation of the euro, and increased competition from China, said Census President Ruth Brand. Manufacturing output was down for a third year in a row in 2025. Friedrich Merz, center-right-led government changed course on a fiscal rigidity in 2025, in part as a reaction against the threat of a pullback of U.S. military support under President Trump. Berlin pledged to unlock more than $1 trillion in defense and infrastructure projects. The stimulus is starting to work, said Holger Schmelding, chief economist at Hamburg-based bank Berenberg. Factory orders and industrial production rose for 3 straight months into November for the first time since 2022. UK economic activity, meanwhile, increased by 0.3% in November, the Office for National Statistics said Thursday. This compares with a 0.1% fall in October and was above a consensus of economics polled by the Wall Street Journal, which expected a rise of 0.1%. The rise was driven by a rise in industrial production, which was up 1.1% on month. Production of vehicles, trailers, and semi-trailers rose 25.5%, indicating a recovery in the automotive sector after a cyber attack on Jaguar Land Rover in August. Services output rose 0.3% in November, boosted by retail sales and professional services. Taiwan, U.S. signed trade deal on chips, by Amrith Ramakur. The U.S. and Taiwan signed a trade pact on Thursday aimed at boosting American production of semiconductors in exchange for lower tariffs, adding to the Trump administration efforts to bring critical industries to the U.S. Under the agreement, Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing will add several new factories to its cluster in Arizona as part of a $250 billion investment in the U.S., the Commerce Department said. In exchange, the U.S. is cutting tariffs on Taiwanese goods to 15% from 20% and exempting Taiwanese chip companies such as TSMC that are investing more in America. The contours of the deal were reported this week. The agreement adds to deals with trading partners including the European Union and Japan, and a truce with China. The Trump administration is attempting to de-escalate tensions over tariffs to avoid denting the economy while securing added investment in the United States. The Taiwan deal focuses on semiconductors because of the dominance of the TSMC, which essentially has a monopoly on making the advanced chips that power the modern economy. They are crucial for customers from Nvidia to Apple that want to build data centers for training AI models or sell consumer products. TSMC has received several $billion in subsidies through the 2022 CHIPS and Science Act and will have roughly a dozen plants in Arizona after its latest expansion. Ford, BYD in talks for car batteries. U.S. car maker needs more batteries for hybrid vehicles as it shifts from full EVs. By Ryan Felton and Raphael Hung. Ford Motor and BYD are in discussions on a partnership in which the American car maker would buy batteries from the Chinese auto company for some of its Ford's hybrid vehicle models, according to people familiar with the matter. The two companies are still discussing how the arrangement would work. One idea is that Ford would import batteries from BYD to Ford's factories outside the U.S. Some of the people said, talks continue, and it's possible a deal won't materialize, the people said. The tie-up, if completed, would pair Ford with the largest Chinese car company that has struck fear in much of the U.S. auto industry over its ability to produce affordable models that carry sophisticated technology. For Ford, it solves a problem. As the company pulls back from the electric vehicles and ramps up its lineup of hybrids, it needs a battery supplier, and BYD is able to produce high-quality car batteries. We talk to lots of companies about many things, a Ford spokesman said. A BYD spokesman declined to comment. Before becoming one of the biggest car makers in the world, BYD developed a robust battery manufacturing business, including batteries for hybrid models. It currently produces most batteries in China, but the company is building up capacity in its overseas plants as it expands in markets such as Southeast Asia, Europe, and Brazil. Bernstein Research estimated that BYD's battery shipments rose 47% last year to 286 gigawatt hours. After the journal story about the potential deal was published, President Trump's trade advisor, Peter Navarro, criticized the idea on X. So Ford wants to simultaneously prop up a Chinese competitor's supply chain and make it more vulnerable to the same company that chain extortion, he said. What could go wrong here? Last month, Ford said it would pivot away from making electric vehicles in the face of slumping demand and take an expected $19.5 billion in charges primarily tied to its EV business. The company said it aims for roughly half of its global sales volume by 2030 to consist of hybrids, extended range plug-in hybrids, and all-electric vehicles. Meanwhile, Ford plans to bolster its lineup of gas-powered vehicles and expand hybrid vehicle options. To do so, Ford needs more batteries to fit the hybrid vehicles. BYD has produced some batteries for commercial vehicles at its California bus manufacturing plant, but hasn't made passenger car vehicles in the U.S. Several American automakers have partnerships with foreign battery makers. GM and Ford have had joint ventures with South Korean companies. Ford is constructing a battery plant in Marshall, Michigan, where it plans to produce lower-cost cells using technology from Chinese battery maker Contemporary Amperex Technology, or CATL. The factory drew criticism from Republican lawmakers who opened investigation into the deal and project. Ford expects the Michigan plant to start operations this year, making batteries for its coming $30,000 all-electric pickup truck. American car executives have been transparent about their fear of upstart Chinese car makers such as BYD and the threat they pose to the U.S. auto industry. Ford has said its planned new EV pickup would be an answer to the Chinese brands that have been snatching up a market share around the world. Chinese automakers are effectively blocked from entering the U.S. market because of high tariffs imposed by the White House and an imminent ban on some software in new cars. But there are signs they are interested in coming. Last week, China auto industry Geely said it's looking to an expansion to the U.S. in the next few years. Even still, Ford and BYD are familiar partners. In 2020, Ford started using BYD batteries in China for cars made by its Chinese joint venture with state-owned car maker Chang'an. A few years later, BYD approached Ford about providing batteries to its cars sold in other markets. With the EV market dialed back, executives at Ford and competitors see hybrid vehicles as a likelier technology to gain steam among U.S. car buyers. Ford has already started notching gains in a burgeoning space. The automaker's hybrid sales in the fourth quarter of last year rose 18% compared with the year prior to about 55,000 total. At the Detroit Auto Show this week, Ford Chief Executive Jim Farley said the company has seen success with the F-150 hybrid variant and now wants to expand across a range of other hybrids and extended range vehicles. I think our message is really simple, he said. Give Americans choice. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal and the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Hershey Bar gets marketing makeover by Katie Drayton. Hershey wants its 130-year-old workhorse chocolate brand to work a little harder. The candy and snacks maker, whose portfolio also includes famous names like Reese's and Twizzlers, has increased its marketing budget for Hershey by 20% to fund the brand's first new advertising campaign in 8 years. The Hershey Company spent $600 million total in advertising expenses in 2024. It will use both traditional and streaming TV, but also marketing channels where the Hershey brand has less experience, such as influencer companies on TikTok, live events, and actively around big cultural moments, like this year's Winter Olympics and celebrations of the 250th anniversary of the independence. The advertising push is set to begin next week. The brand will also be promoting in the most modern of advertising plays, a forthcoming movie called Hershey, about the company's founder and his wife. A product drop of limited Dubai-inspired Hershey bars last month in New York Times Squares, coupled with a sponsored presence at the Rockefeller Center tree lighting ceremony, foreshadowed the new strategy to stay on trend in the public eye. The brand previously followed the same primary seasonal advertising playbook year after year, emphasizing Halloween and Valentine's Day, for example, to reliably affect but little applause. You see charm and change through the course of the year in different seasonal moments, and over the course of the life stages too, said Stacy Tayeff, Chief Growth Officer at Hershey. Our goal is to fill in the gaps, she said, referring to the candy shopping occasions outside of Halloween and Easter, and to households without children who eat sweets. Hershey said the whole company will benefit if Hershey's one of the designated core brands can increase sales. When we have growth in those big brands, that helps us fuel expansion and growth into other parts of our portfolio as well, Tayeff said. Tayeff, who joined Hershey from PepsiCo last April, has been tinkering with the marketing machinery during a bumpy period for the company. Rising cocoa costs have hurt the bottom line since 2023. It raised its outlook in October as cocoa prices moderated, but noted it would incur full-year tariff costs of up to $170 million. Organic net sales for the most recent quarter increased 6.2% from the same period a year earlier, but Halloween retail sales were subdued. Hershey and chocolate brands as a whole have so far remained surprisingly resilient to the rise of the GLP-1 weight loss drugs, said David Palmer, a food analyst at Evercore's ISI. But Hershey consumers are more price sensitive outside of holiday seasons, and the brand has more recently been overshadowed by its stablemate Reese's, which garnered more buzz with product news and innovations, Palmer said. Reese's recent collaboration with Manzola's Oreo, which promoted almost entirely on social media, exceeded internal sales targets and over-indexed with Gen Z and millennials, according to an October earnings summary from Hershey Chief Executive Keith Tamer, who joined Wendy's last August after a long stint at PepsiCo. Sale of Hershey's seasonal products in the 12 weeks ended December 28th declined by 1.8% versus a year earlier, while Reese's seasonal sales grew 0.2%, according to Evercore ISI, analyst of Circana data. Reese's Original Cups, meanwhile, increased sales 17.8% more than Hershey's Regular, whose sales grew 7.6%, according to analytics. To stir consumer interest, the company plans to chase headlines with new iterations of the Hershey brand. Following the $10,000 bar run of Dubai-style chocolate bar, across the whole portfolio, we are going to be ensuring that we have options that push the envelope a little more, deliver texture, deliver flavor in a new way, that's new and unique, Tayeff said. Still, the company is mindful of some backlash against the trend of sensory overloading mishaps of treats driven by social media. There's a sense of, if I'm going to spend my hard-earned dollar on a piece of chocolate, I know that Hershey is going to deliver what I want, she said. There's power in that familiarity. Paramount loses bid for more Netflix deal info, by Lauren Thomas. Paramount filed to force Paramount failed to force Warner Brothers Discovery to disclose more information soon about its deal with Netflix when a judge denied its request Thursday. Paramount earlier this week filed a lawsuit in Delaware seeking to compel Warner to release more information about its merger agreement with Netflix, specifically how Warner values the global network's business it will create as part of a plan to split itself in two. Paramount also asked the judge to expedite the proceeding for the lawsuit ahead of next Wednesday, when its tender offer for Warner is set to expire. On Thursday, Delaware Chauncey Court Judge Morgan Zern denied Paramount's motion to expedite, saying that Paramount hasn't proven it would suffer irreparable harm from any alleged omissions of information by Warner. Zern added that Paramount has other ways to find that information. Paramount said in a statement that the ruling didn't pertain to the merits of its claim and that Warner shareholders need the additional information to make an informed decision. Shareholders should ask why their board is working so hard to hide this information, Paramount said. Paramount also said Thursday that it plans to extend its tender offer beyond January 21st. It is able to keep extending that deadline. Warner called the lawsuit yet another unserious attempt to distract and said the judge saw right through it. Despite its multiple opportunities, Paramount Skydance continues to propose a transaction that our board unanimously concluded is not superior to the merger agreement with Netflix. Representatives from both Paramount and Warner traded barbs during Thursday's court meeting. Lawyers representing Paramount said Warner is acting like an ostrich with its head in the sand. Warner's lawyers, making a Hollywood reference, said Paramount is effectively trying to shut down a movie set before the movie is finished filming. Jackpot. Penthouse sale sets Las Vegas record. Technology investor Richard Hedel has sold a Las Vegas penthouse for $21 million, setting a condominium record for Clark County, according to listing agent Ivan Shear of IS Luxury. The buyer's identity wasn't disclosed. The condo is located in the Summit Club, a private community developed by Discovery Land Co. and about 10 miles west of Las Vegas Strip. Handel purchased the unit for $9.4 million in 2023. The original asking price was $25 million, but it was most recently asking $23.5 million. Handel declined to identify the buyers, but said they also purchased the furniture and art, right down to the silverware, he said. We didn't have a place for it anyway. The penthouse is roughly 5,000 square feet with 5 bedrooms and views of the Strip and Red Rock Mountains. It has a wraparound terrace with a hot tub, lap pool, and outdoor shower, said Shear, who represented the seller and buyer in the deal. Hendrell is the former CEO of the gaming companies Bailey Technology and Powerhouse Technologies. There were construction delays after he purchased his unit at the Summit Club, and by the time it was complete, he had moved into a single-family home